Hey guys, we're Legend 95, recording live from your local county prison cell, and this one's this one's got a story behind it. Um, First of all, you guys should know I'm not a sentimental guy. I'm not. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, by the way. I'm not usually one of these guys who, like, especially when it comes to celebrities or anything. But uh, what is it? Late last week or early this week, we did lose two very significant people within their communities. Um, Lost Kevin Conroy, the voice actor for Batman, for the Batman from Batman the Animated Series, and in the Arkham games, and scratching the surface of his what he's done, but what he's most famous for. And we also lost Jason David Frank, who played Tommy Oliver in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and the many other things he's been involved with in the Power Rangers franchise. So when I've been very busy these last few weeks. As you guys know, I actually got back from vacation and had to do the Asta versus Midoriya thing, and I had to, I've been working so much, and all this other, thank with the holiday coming up, I didn't really have much free time. But after, when Kevin Conroy passed, I thought about doing a Batman fight, and I thought, they've done so many different Batman fights, I think I can skip this one. And then when Jason David Frank died, I was like, okay, maybe I can find a Green Ranger fight or something, or a White Ranger fight. And nothing really clicked. And then I saw this one, and I actually kind of ignored it at first because I didn't really look into both characters, despite being as big of a fan of both mediums as I am. And then it hit me. I was like, oh, wait a minute. This actually does both of them. I thought, that's insane. That's an insane coincidence that this fight incorporates both characters somewhat. That both of these people who happen to unfortunately pass in the last week or two. So, introduction out of the way, the fight I'm doing today is Lord Drakkon from, I suppose you would say, the Power Rangers franchise, because he's not directly in any of the shows. And the Batman Who Laughs from DC Comics. Now, these are not the respective characters played by either of these actors. Lord Drakkon is a Tommy Oliver. We'll get into it in the fight, but the point is, these are alternative evil versions of their respective characters who, in some cases, successfully accomplish the opposite of what their original counterpart stands for. So let's start with Lord Drakkon. Now, this episode's going to take a while, probably. But Lord Drakkon is a Tommy Oliver from an alternate timeline. I guess alternate universe, you could say. Where, as the Green Ranger, he actually stays with Rita. I don't know if the Sword of Darkness was ever destroyed, but after being mind controlled, he decides to actually stay aligned with Rita. This is actually hinted at in the IDW comic storyline, which Battle for the Grid, the game, and everything is pretty heavily based on. Where we see that Tommy's being like haunted by Rita even after everything because she kind of like mind controlled him. But he comes from a timeline where originally Tommy, stays aligned with Rita and actually does a thorough enough job defeating and killing some of the Rangers that it actually has a phenomenal impact on how the story progresses, to the point where Zordon actually has to give Jason the White Ranger suit in order to have a chance of stopping Tommy, right? And Tommy actually swoops in last minute and steals the tries to steal the suit for himself before, I think he tries to steal the power coin that's given to him before the process is finished, which actually results in him having the half green, half white suit. So he's not he doesn't obtain the full White Ranger suit, but he obtains part of the White Ranger suit plus his Green Ranger suit. He actually ends up turning on Rita and destroying all of them. And basically, in the process, discovers how to open up portals to other dimensions and travel through time and whatnot. So he ends up doing that, finding other Rangers in, I guess alternate version. If he's traveling through time, he's going through alternate versions of other series. Like he goes to the Samurai timeline, which is in the same timeline as Mighty Morphin. So he finds them later. So it's the same Samurai, but then again, would Samurai have happened without? Yeah, it's a whole weird thing. But he goes into basically an alternate version of the Samurai timeline and steals one of their power swords, and he goes into an alternate version of the Ninja Storm timeline and steals one of their devices, and he just goes around hopping, taking all of these power sources to the timeline, and his ultimate goal is to essentially smash all these together and merge with the Morphin Grid. For those who don't know, the Morphin Grid is the source of power in the Power Rangers universe. It's responsible for the balancing of good and evil. It's responsible for, manipulating the forces of life and death and all that. It's I mean, they make the joke that it's essentially the Force, right? And it kind of controls reality. And I believe in one of the in at least one timeline, he actually successfully merges with the Morphin Grid and becomes a complete dictator and just rules over the entirety of his world, even actually kind of turning the past Rangers into his own, or at least the past Ranger suits at least into his own personal attack squad, to the point where he kills Walter Jones, I believe, and uses the Black Mighty Morphin Ranger to he kind of replicates and distributes those power coins to become his own police force, right? So he basically, the opposite of what Zordon wanted, which was a responsible team of individuals who won't overshoot their powers and won't take things too far, will always will only use their powers as a last resort, will always only use them for defense. This guy just straight up takes his power and says, I'm taking over everything with it. Now that only happened in one possible timeline, because in Battle for the Grid, the IDW universe, Tommy actually stops him and kind of humbles him a little bit, saying the only reason you want to merge with the Grid is so that you can create a version of yourself that isn't, that's good enough or that isn't broken. But the point is, why, as Lord Drakkon, he still has all of Tommy's powers. He still has the combined powers of all of the Rangers that he's taken, which is essential. Certain Rangers have certain different abilities and whatnot, but for the most part, a Power Ranger is a Power Ranger, so by combining all the different powers, he does, I guess, get access to multiple different Ranger suits, which makes him umpteen times more superhuman, gives him different knowledge. He would have knowledge of ninjutsu with the Ninja Ranger, he'd have Bojutsu with the Samurai Ranger, he'd have, right, etc., etc. Not to mention the different martial arts experience that Tommy himself has, and what the Green Ranger suit might have given him with Rita. Also, but let's assume the dragons. Well, actually, should we assume the Dragon Sword's not a part of this? I don't know. But yeah, so this is and if we do use the version of him that merges with the morphing grid, right? He does gain the ability to manipulate reality. He does become almost invincible. He gets, technically, I guess, manipulation over life and death, because we've seen the morphing grid be used to, like, create plant life from nothingness. We've seen things like Zordon be able to access the grid and use it to, and we've seen the grid also bring Zordon back to life in multiple timelines, actually. We've seen that from the movie, and we've seen that, well, from both movies, actually. We've seen that from the Ivan Ooze movie, and we've seen that in the, what do they call it? The Mesozoic era Ranger movie? The Michael Bay one, right? That's technically its own canon now, because of Battle for the Grid. So, we've seen the morphing grid be used for powering entire cities, powering these giant Zord. Just a fraction being connected gives you all of this incredible power. So, like, being completely merged within it would basically make you, like, a god, because the grid covers things like magic, cosmic science, all of this different stuff that you're able to use. All of that derives from the same grid. So yeah, he's essentially a god when he combines with these grid. Now going on to Batman Who Laughs. Now, Batman Who Laughs is an alternate universe version of Bruce Wayne, where the Joker dies and infects Bruce Wayne with Joker gas before during his death. He somehow booby traps his own heart so that he expels Joker gas when he dies. And little by little, this started taking effect on Bruce, and to the point where he was kind of irreversibly damaged and ends up mowing down the entire Bat family with machine guns, knowing that they would be the first ones to notice that something was wrong with him. After that, it was kind of point of no return. He ends up blowing up a hospital full of children. That was what Joker did before him. And he ends up taking a bunch of those children and infecting them with Joker Venom, ends up infecting Tim Drake with Joker Venom, and creating the Rabid Robins, which are, as it sounds, they're just robins who are on chains and are just feral animals, essentially. They're people, but they're basically just rabid. There's no humanity left in them. And, he somehow gains the ability to, like, create chains and manipulate them and everything. And, he takes his time pretty much systematically destroying the Justice League until, no exaggeration, this man kills every other living being on Earth. And I think possibly the universe, when you consider, I don't know if he's killed, like, Darkseid or anything, but he killed, like, literally every other person on the planet Earth in his universe. Guy gets around. Then, that was enough to impress, I forget his name, but he was to impress the guy in charge of the multiverse, who basically made Batman Who Laughs the forerunner for his dark team of guys who were trying to take over the multiverse. And eventually, this guy gets killed, but had a contingency plan that he would get his brain planted in the dead body of another universe's Batman who obtained Dr. Manhattan's chair, and would therefore not completely, but gain some limited access to Dr. Manhattan's powers. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Manhattan is like There's gods, there's oh shit, actually gods, and then Dr. Manhattan. So this guy even getting a fraction of Dr. Manhattan's power means, again, he gains control over reality. He becomes nigh invincible and superhuman. Can control life and death, can bring people back to life, can create life from nothingness, can manipulate fundamental forces of the universe, like, gravity and matter and things like that. Time and space. He can he can fight on even terms with Superman instead of having to actually plan ahead. Yeah, so this guy basically becomes godlike as well when you take that contingency into consideration. Then when you have but not to say he's without weakness, because technically speaking, he has been fought with on even footing after obtaining these powers. Wonder Woman was able to fight him hand to hand after he had fought for literally 1,000,000 years. Straight, without stop. She fought him for literally 1,000,000 years and then knocked him into a sun and killed him. So he has been defeated, but the scale you have to reach before being able to defeat him is pretty insane. So how do I think a fight between these two goes? Well, okay. There's two ways to look at this. Since they both have control over, they both have these godlike abilities, right? You can either compare the feats that they've done with these abilities and just do it purely on math, or you can look at the nature of these abilities, right? If you're going to include them. You could also say, well, if they both have absolute power, then they kind of cancel each other out, and then we look for any advantages we can outside of that. And I think the answer is kind of somewhere mashed between all that. So, when we look at straight up power level, initially, before all the godlike abilities come into play, Bruce Wayne definitely has more martial arts experience than Tommy. Now, maybe if you consider all of the combined martial arts knowledge that he gets from all of the different suits, plus his own knowledge and everything taking over the world, maybe in that case you can make a claim that he might have somewhere around Bruce's natural ability. But don't forget, even in this timeline, Bruce Wayne is someone who has mastered all martial arts known to man, right? Mastered, not proficient, mastered. So it's really hard to kind of out experience Bruce Wayne in this regard. Not to mention, despite taking over and everything like that, even though I think he was in his 30s when he finally conquered the world, he's still just a high school kid who went on a rampage. Whereas Bruce Wayne is fucking Batman. He's a detective. He's got all this going for him. But then you get the chain powers and shit, there is some superhuman versus non-human element here, but Bruce has a lot of advantages, but I think just would get generally, without these godlike abilities, would get generally outmatched and overpowered by Tommy here. But when you consider the morphing grid versus the Manhattan chair, that's where I think these things start to change. And I think these will be a factor. I don't think it's going to be, they just cancel each other out, so we look at regular experience. Because despite having essentially absolute power, both of these guys have been able to be defeated, right? It's not like they just went under, they were perfect throughout that, right? Even after obtaining the grid, he still went to other dimensions and was fought against in his different timelines. So, and we've seen Lord Drakkon be defeated multiple times through different timelines as well. So, we know that he's very capable of being defeated, and these both are very insane individuals, right? But Batman Who Laughs kind of has that Joker insanity where, yes, he's insane, but he's kind of like in control of his own insanity, and he just kind of doesn't care anymore, but he's still like a genius. And that same genius is now being run by the actual intelligence of Bruce Wayne. So you've got one guy who's basically just insane and has like a god complex, and you've got another guy who's like about to do it. So I feel like, not to mention, like, we've seen Joker toy with the insanities of others before. So, like, if there's a mental complex to be exploited, you can bet that Bruce and Joker together would be able to, because that's essentially what Batman Who Laughs is, character-wise, would be able to exploit the, his ego or whatever. So, put that in consideration. I mean, even in the face of reality warping, a Zord isn't going to make all that much difference. So let's forget about the Dragon Zord for a second. In only one timeline did Drakkon absorb the morphing grid. And the morphing grid, again, lets you manipulate reality. It is kind of like the Force, but it's not the entirety of, you know what I mean? Like, you don't get to rewrite, like, the universe. It did, like, purge evil from the universe, but that was after, like, very specific steps were taken to I think it even destroyed the grid, actually. And we see the morphing grid get overworked a lot because, like, that's how Rangers get defeated. They have a personal force field that, make you lose your connection to the grid. And we see Zords get blown up because their connection to the grid is destroyed. So we know that the grid is not really infallible. Neither is Manhattan's chair, but when you look at what it takes to defeat Batman Who Laughs while he's powered by Manhattan versus the grid, we've seen the grid get almost destroyed before. When you consider what it takes to do one versus the other, like destroying 4 giant robots versus fighting for literally a million years against a goddess, I guess, and then getting thrown into the sun, you can see that one is clearly on a different scale than another. So, with all these different advantages, I mean, initially, like I said, I think Tommy wins. Base level without the god powers, Tommy wins, right? It's interesting, but Tommy wins. It's still interesting after the god powers, but, like, it's interesting in the sense that, like, they tend to get a little less interesting because it's kind of like the devil's in the details, because both guys can kind of do anything. So, when I look at these two things, I think there's no doubt that Batman Who Laughs get it. But yeah, anyway, this happens to be a really good fight that I probably would have done regardless. The timing, like I said, is just very convenient. And I'm not trying to cash in or say that this is, it's a good thing it happened together or anything. But, if there were a match that was perfect to tribute to these two unfortunate events that happened to happen right near each other, I think this is it. So, rip Jason David Frank. I've said some things about him over the years and who he's affiliated with, but that doesn't really matter right now. Rip Kevin Conroy. I don't think I've ever said anything bad about Kevin Conroy, but these two are definitely, despite what anyone thinks of them, they definitely were, deserved every accolade they were given. They, they're treasures within their own communities, and they will definitely be missed. So, anyway, Rebel Engine 95. See ya.